The morning fog rolled across the Coronado Beach as Sarah Martinez adjusted her notepad for the third time. At 28, she had covered military stories before, but never anything quite like this. Her editor at Defense Weekly had assigned her to document the Navy SEALs' new underwater endurance training program. The story was supposed to be straightforward. Observe, interview, write. Nothing more. Sarah had arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Center 2 hours early, hoping to get a feel for the environment before the chaos began. The base buzzed with activity, even in the pre-dawn hours. She watched as instructors prepared equipment along the beach. Their movements precise and purposeful. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly before them, its dark waters hiding the challenges that lay beneath. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson spotted her first. His weathered face showed the skepticism that came with 20 years in the teams. Another reporter, he thought, here to write about the elite warriors, without understanding what that really meant. He approached her with the professional courtesy that military personnel showed to civilians, but his eyes held reservations. "You must be the journalist," Thompson said, extending a hand that felt like granite. "I'm Chief Thompson. I'll be your guide today." Sarah shook his hand firmly, meeting his gaze directly. She had learned early in her career that showing any weakness around military personnel meant losing their respect immediately. "Sarah Martinez, Defense Weekly. I appreciate you taking the time." Thompson nodded, studying her more closely. She wore practical clothing, dark jeans, sturdy boots, and a weather-resistant jacket. Her long black hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she carried herself with confidence that surprised him. Most reporters who came to observe SEAL training seemed more interested in the mystique than the reality. "The training starts at 0600 hours, Thompson explained as they walked toward the beach. "Today's focus is underwater endurance. The candidates will be tested on their ability to maintain composure and physical performance while operating in challenging aquatic environments." As they reached the training area, Sarah could see the candidates gathering near the water's edge. 22 men, all in peak physical condition, stretched and prepared their equipment. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation. This was the final phase of their training, and everyone knew that not all of them would make it through. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the lead instructor, briefed the group on the day's challenge. The candidates would need to complete a series of underwater obstacles while holding their breath for extended periods. The current record for the complete course stood at 8 minutes and 47 seconds, set by a SEAL named Rodriguez nearly 10 years ago. It was a record that had become legendary among the teams. Sarah positioned herself on a rocky outcrop that provided a clear view of the training area. She began taking notes, documenting the preparation process and the intensity she saw in each candidate's face. Through her telephoto lens, she captured the focused determination that separated these men from ordinary sailors. The first candidate entered the water at exactly 0600 hours. Sarah watched as he disappeared beneath the surface, following the underwater course marked by a series of submerged obstacles. Instructors in diving gear monitored his progress, ready to intervene if necessary. The candidate emerged gasping after 6 minutes and 12 seconds. A respectable time, but far from threatening the standing record. One by one, the candidates attempted the course. Some performed admirably, others struggled with the psychological pressure of operating underwater for extended periods. Sarah documented each attempt, noting the techniques that worked and those that failed. She began to understand the mental strength required to push through the physical discomfort and fear that came with oxygen deprivation. By mid-morning, 15 candidates had completed their attempts. The best time so far belonged to Petty Officer Davis, who managed 7 minutes and 59 seconds. It was a strong performance, but still nearly a minute short of Rodriguez's decade-old record. The remaining candidates looked increasingly nervous as they realized how difficult the challenge truly was. During a brief break, Chief Thompson approached Sarah's observation point. He found her completely absorbed in her work, reviewing her notes and comparing times. Her focus impressed him. She wasn't just going through the motions of covering a story. "Getting what you need?" Thompson asked, settling onto a nearby rock. Sarah looked up from her notepad. "This is incredible. The physical demands are obvious, but the mental component is fascinating. How do they train for the psychological pressure? Thompson smiled slightly. It was the first time a reporter had asked him about the mental aspects of SEAL training. That's the real challenge, he said. Anyone can get in shape. But learning to think clearly when your body is screaming for oxygen, that separates the SEALs from everyone else. They continued watching as candidate number 16 entered the water. Sarah found herself holding her breath unconsciously, timing his attempt on her stopwatch. The candidate struggled with the third obstacle, using precious seconds to navigate a series of underwater hoops. He surfaced after 5 minutes and 43 seconds, clearly disappointed with his performance. As the morning progressed, Sarah noticed something interesting. The candidates who performed best seemed to have a different approach to breathing preparation. While others hyperventilated or held their breath in practice, the successful candidates appeared to use a more controlled, meditative technique. She made detailed notes about these observations, planning to ask Thompson about them later. Candidate 17 was Petty Officer James Mitchell, a quiet man from Tennessee who had impressed instructors throughout his training. Sarah watched as he prepared at the water's edge, his breathing slow and controlled. Unlike the others, he seemed almost relaxed as he entered the water. Mitchell moved through the underwater course with fluid efficiency. Sarah tracked his progress through the crystal-clear water, noting how he conserved movement and maintained perfect body position. His technique was different from the previous candidates, smoother, more economical. When he finally surfaced, the stopwatch read 8 minutes and 15 seconds. A murmur went through the instructor team. It was the best time of the day, and dangerously close to Rodriguez's record. Mitchell treaded water calmly, showing no signs of the distress that had affected other candidates after their attempts. Chief Thompson walked to the water's edge to congratulate him personally. "Outstanding work, Mitchell," Thompson called out. "That's the kind of performance we expect from future SEALs." Sarah continued documenting the remaining attempts, but her attention kept returning to Mitchell's technique. There had been something almost effortless about his approach. During lunch break, she approached him for an interview. "Petty Officer Mitchell, that was an impressive performance out there. Can you tell me about your preparation?" Mitchell was humble about his achievement. "Just tried to stay calm and move efficiently, ma'am. My grandfather was a pearl diver in the Philippines. He taught me some breathing techniques when I was young." This detail fascinated Sarah. She asked him to explain the techniques, and Mitchell demonstrated the slow, rhythmic breathing pattern his grandfather had taught him. It was completely different from the aggressive hyperventilation she had observed from other candidates. As the afternoon session began, Sarah found herself thinking about Mitchell's story. The connection between his family history and his performance suggested something deeper about the training process. She began to see parallels between ancient diving traditions and modern military techniques. The final candidates of the day took their turns with varying degrees of success. None came close to Mitchell's time, and several struggled to complete the course at all. As the training session concluded, Chief Thompson gathered the group for debrief and evaluation. "Today's results show the importance of mental preparation alongside physical conditioning," Thompson addressed the candidates. "Those who succeeded maintained composure under pressure. Those who struggled let fear override their training." Sarah packed her equipment as the beach emptied of personnel. She had gathered excellent material for her article, but something about the day's events lingered in her mind. The underwater course looked incredibly challenging, yet she found herself curious about the techniques she had observed. Chief Thompson approached as she prepared to leave. "How did your first day go, Miss Martinez?" "Enlightening," Sarah replied honestly. "I had no idea about the complexity involved. The mental aspects are as demanding as the physical ones." Thompson nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right. Most people don't understand that SEAL training is really about developing mental toughness. The physical skills can be taught, but the ability to think clearly under extreme stress, that's what makes the difference." As they walked back toward the parking area, Sarah found herself asking questions that went beyond her assignment. She wanted to understand more about the breathing techniques, the psychological preparation, and the history behind the underwater training program. "Would it be possible to observe more sessions?" she asked. I think there's a deeper story here, about the intersection of ancient techniques and modern training methods. Thompson considered her request. Most reporters were satisfied with a single day of observation. But Sarah's genuine interest in understanding the training process impressed him. I'll check with Lieutenant Commander Morrison. If you're serious about documenting this properly, we might be able to arrange additional access. That evening, Sarah sat in her hotel room reviewing her notes and photographs from the day. The images captured the intensity and focus of the candidates. But she kept returning to her observations about breathing techniques and mental preparation. She began researching the history of breath-holding and underwater activities, discovering connections she hadn't expected. The ancient art of pearl diving, which Mitchell had mentioned, shared remarkable similarities with modern military diving techniques. Both required exceptional breath control, mental discipline, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Sarah wondered if these historical practices could offer insights into modern training methods. She also found herself thinking about the underwater course itself. The obstacles looked challenging but not impossible for someone with proper preparation. The record set by Rodriguez 10 years ago seemed achievable for the right person with the right approach. Sarah caught herself wondering what it would feel like to attempt the course personally. The thought surprised her. She was there to observe and report, not to participate. But something about watching the candidates push their limits had awakened her own competitive instincts. Sarah had always been athletic. She swam regularly and had completed several triathlons. But this was different. This was about mental toughness as much as physical ability. As she prepared for bed, Sarah made a decision. She would return to the base the next day, not just to continue her reporting, but to learn more about the techniques she had observed. If Chief Thompson approved additional access, she wanted to understand every aspect of the training program. The next morning brought clear skies and calm seas. Sarah arrived at the base early again, this time carrying additional research materials she had printed the night before. She had found several academic papers on breath-holding techniques and wanted to compare them with what she had observed during training. Chief Thompson met her at the security gate with unexpected news. Lieutenant Commander Morrison reviewed your request. He's agreed to give you extended access, but with one condition. You'll need to complete a basic water safety qualification first. Sarah's heart rate quickened. This was more involvement than she had expected, but it also represented an opportunity to better understand the training process. What does the qualification involve? RP. Nothing too demanding, Thompson explained as they walked toward the training facility. Basic swimming assessment, treading water, and some elementary breath-holding exercises. We can't have you observing from the water unless we know you can handle yourself safely. The qualification process took place in the base swimming pool under the supervision of a junior instructor. Sarah had to demonstrate her ability to swim 500 meters, tread water for 10 minutes, and hold her breath underwater for 2 minutes. She completed all requirements easily, drawing approving nods from the instructors. You're obviously comfortable in the water, the junior instructor commented. Have you done any competitive swimming? College level, Sarah replied. I've stayed active with triathlons and ocean swimming. Nothing like what your candidates are doing, though. Well, after completing her qualification, Sarah was issued safety equipment and briefed on observation protocols. She would be allowed to accompany instructors in the water during training sessions, giving her unprecedented access to document the underwater course from multiple angles. The second day of training brought new candidates and fresh challenges. Sarah found herself in the water, wearing a diving mask and snorkel, positioned to observe the underwater obstacles up close. From this vantage point, she could see the precise movements required to navigate each section efficiently. The course began with a 30-meter swim through a submerged tunnel. Candidates had to maintain perfect buoyancy control while navigating the narrow passage. The tunnel led to a series of obstacles that tested different skills: spatial awareness, fine motor control, and the ability to problem-solve while oxygen deprived. Sarah watched candidate after candidate attempt the course, documenting their techniques and noting the subtle differences between successful and unsuccessful approaches. She began to see patterns in the data. Certain breathing preparations led to better performance. Specific movement techniques conserved oxygen more effectively, and mental attitudes affected physical results. During a break between sessions, Sarah found herself swimming the length of the pool, practicing the breathing techniques she had observed. The controlled, rhythmic breathing that Mitchell had demonstrated felt natural to her. Her own swimming background had taught her similar concepts, though not applied to breath holding specifically. Chief Thompson noticed her practice session. "You're picking up the techniques quickly," he observed. "Most people struggle with the breathing pattern at first." Sarah surfaced and treaded water beside the pool edge. "It reminds me of meditation breathing I learned years ago. The principle seems similar. Controlling your physiological response through conscious breathing." Thompson's expression showed genuine interest. "That's an insight most of our candidates don't make immediately. The connection between mental state and physical performance is crucial for SEAL operations." As the afternoon session concluded, Sarah realized she had gathered far more material than she had originally planned. Her article for Defense Weekly was evolving into something more comprehensive, a detailed examination of how ancient techniques influenced modern military training. But more than that, she found herself personally fascinated by the challenge of the underwater course. That evening, Sarah returned to her hotel with a head full of new ideas and observations. She had documented another day of exceptional performances, but she couldn't stop thinking about the course itself. The combination of physical demand and mental challenge appealed to something deep in her competitive nature. She spent the evening writing detailed notes about her observations, but she also found herself researching more about breath-holding training. The techniques used by traditional pearl divers, Japanese ama divers, and modern freedivers all shared common elements. Sarah wondered if combining these approaches might yield even better results than the military's current training methods. The thought that had been building in her mind finally crystallized. She wanted to attempt the course herself, not as a stunt or publicity gesture, but as a legitimate test of the techniques she had been studying. Sarah had the swimming background, she had observed the successful approaches, and she had access to expert instruction. The idea was crazy, she knew. She was a journalist, not a military candidate. But something about the challenge called to her. Maybe it was the competitor in her that had driven her to excel in swimming and triathlons, or maybe it was the researcher who wanted to understand her subject completely. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah made a mental commitment. Tomorrow, she would ask Chief Thompson about the possibility of attempting the course herself. The worst he could do was say no. But something told her that her genuine interest and demonstrated competence might open doors that remained closed to typical observers. The third day at the naval base dawned with perfect conditions for underwater training. Sarah arrived earlier than usual, carrying with her a proposal she had written the night before. She had outlined her request to attempt the underwater course, explaining her reasoning and acknowledging the risks involved. Chief Thompson read her proposal over morning coffee, his expression unreadable. Lieutenant Commander Morrison joined them for the discussion, bringing the authority to approve or deny such an unusual request. Lieutenant Commander Morrison finished reading Sarah's proposal and set it down on the table between them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the briefing room as he considered her request. In 23 years of military service, he had never encountered a journalist who wanted to personally test the limits of SEAL training protocols. "Miss Martinez," Morrison began, his voice measured and professional, "what you're proposing is unprecedented. This isn't a civilian adventure course. The underwater obstacle challenge is designed to push trained military personnel to their absolute limits." Sarah had anticipated this response. She leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact with both officers. "Sir, I understand the risks involved, but I believe that experiencing the course firsthand would give me insights that no amount of observation can provide. I've documented 2 days of training, and I think I understand the techniques involved." Chief Thompson, who had been quietly observing the exchange, spoke up. "Her water skills are solid, Skipper. She qualified easily yesterday. And I've watched her swimming. She's got natural ability in the water." Morrison nodded slowly. He had built his career on making calculated risks, and this situation required careful consideration. On one hand, allowing a civilian journalist to attempt a military training exercise created obvious liability issues. On the other hand, Sarah's genuine commitment to understanding the training process had impressed his entire staff. There would be conditions, Morrison said finally. Multiple safety divers, medical personnel on standby, and the right to abort the attempt at any time if we determine it's unsafe. You would also need to complete additional preparation training under our supervision. Sarah felt her heart race with excitement, but she kept her expression composed. I accept all those conditions, sir. What kind of preparation would be required? Morrison consulted with Thompson briefly before responding. 3 days of intensive breath holding and underwater navigation training. You'll work directly with our lead instructor, Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, the man who set the current record you'd be attempting to approach. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that she would be training with the very person whose record had stood for nearly 10 years. Rodriguez had returned to Coronado as an instructor after completing multiple deployments with SEAL Team 3. His expertise in underwater operations was legendary within the community. Rodriguez will assess your capabilities honestly, Morrison continued. If he determines that you're not ready, or that the attempt would be dangerous, we stop immediately. No arguments. No second chances. Sarah agreed to these terms without hesitation. She understood that the military's reputation and her own safety depended on thorough preparation. The opportunity to train with Rodriguez was incredibly valuable, regardless of whether she ultimately attempted the course. That afternoon, Sarah met Petty Officer Rodriguez at the pool complex. He was smaller than she had expected, with a quiet intensity that reminded her of elite athletes she had interviewed. His approach to training was methodical and focused on fundamentals rather than impressive demonstrations. Chief Thompson tells me you want to attempt the underwater course, Rodriguez said as they stood beside the pool. Before we discuss that, I need to see what you can actually do in the water. For the next hour, Rodriguez put Sarah through a series of swimming and breath-holding assessments. He evaluated her stroke technique, her ability to maintain depth control, and her natural breath-holding capacity. Sarah's initial attempts yielded modest results. She could hold her breath for nearly 3 minutes while stationary and maintain good form during underwater swimming. You have potential, Rodriguez said after completing his evaluation. Your technique is sound, and you're obviously comfortable underwater. But attempting the course requires more than basic ability. You need to understand how your body responds to oxygen deprivation and carbon dioxide buildup. Rodriguez explained the physiological processes involved in extended breath holding. The human body's response to decreased oxygen levels created both physical and psychological challenges. Understanding these responses was crucial for maintaining performance during the underwater course. The record I set wasn't about superior lung capacity, Rodriguez explained as they took a break. It was about efficiency of movement and mental control. Every action underwater has to be deliberate and economical. Panic or unnecessary movement will end your attempt quickly. Sarah listened intently, taking mental notes about everything Rodriguez shared. His approach to breath holding was surprisingly scientific, involving specific breathing patterns, body positioning, and mental techniques that optimized oxygen usage. She recognized elements similar to the meditation practices she had studied years earlier. The first training session focused on breath-holding techniques. Rodriguez taught her a preparation routine that involved controlled hyperventilation, followed by specific breathing patterns designed to maximize blood oxygen levels. The technique was more complex than anything Sarah had imagined, requiring precise timing and concentration. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8, Rodriguez instructed. Repeat this pattern 20 times before each attempt. Your body will begin to adapt to operating with higher CO2 levels. Sarah practiced the breathing pattern repeatedly, learning to time her inhales and exhales precisely. The technique felt strange at first, but she gradually began to understand how it affected her physiological state. Her heart rate decreased, and she felt a sense of calm focus that reminded her of pre-race preparations from her competitive swimming days. After mastering the basic breathing preparation, Rodriguez introduced underwater movement techniques. The key was maintaining neutral buoyancy while minimizing energy expenditure. Every movement had to serve a specific purpose, and unnecessary actions would quickly deplete oxygen reserves. Watch my body position, Rodriguez demonstrated as he glided effortlessly through the water. Arms at my sides, using legs for propulsion only when necessary. I'm not fighting the water. I'm working with it. Sarah attempted to replicate his technique, focusing on smooth, controlled movements. Her initial efforts were clumsy compared to Rodriguez's demonstration, but she gradually began to understand the principles involved. Swimming efficiently underwater required a completely different mindset than surface swimming. The second day of training introduced more advanced concepts. Rodriguez began teaching Sarah about mental techniques for managing the psychological pressure of oxygen deprivation. As carbon dioxide levels increased in her bloodstream, her body would signal increasing urgency to breathe. Learning to manage these signals without panicking was crucial for success. Your body will tell you that you need to breathe long before you actually do, Rodriguez explained. The trick is recognizing which signals are real warnings and which are just your brain being cautious. Most people surface when they're only using about 60% of their actual capacity. Rodriguez taught her visualization techniques to maintain focus during the uncomfortable final stages of a breath hold. Sarah learned to imagine herself moving through the course successfully, using mental rehearsal to prepare for the physical challenges she would face. See yourself completing each obstacle smoothly, Rodriguez instructed during a meditation session. Feel the water temperature. Visualize the movements required. Imagine emerging successfully at the end. Your mind needs to believe success is possible before your body can achieve it. Sarah found the mental training as challenging as the physical preparation. Maintaining focus while experiencing the discomfort of oxygen deprivation required constant practice. She spent hours working on breathing techniques and visualization exercises, gradually building her confidence and capability. By the third day of preparation, Sarah's improvement was noticeable to everyone involved. Her breath-holding capacity had increased to nearly 5 minutes, and her underwater swimming technique had become smooth and efficient. More importantly, she had learned to remain calm and focused during the discomfort of extended breath-holding. Rodriguez put her through a series of practice scenarios that simulated obstacles from the actual course. Sarah navigated underwater tunnels, retrieved objects from the pool bottom, and performed fine motor skills while holding her breath. Each exercise built her confidence and revealed areas that needed additional work. Your physical preparation is adequate, Rodriguez told her after the final training session. The real test will be mental. The course will push you beyond your comfort zone. And success depends on maintaining composure when every instinct tells you to surface immediately. That evening, Lieutenant Commander Morrison conducted a final briefing with Sarah, reviewing safety protocols and emergency procedures. The attempt would be scheduled for the following morning, with optimal weather conditions and full safety support. Medical personnel would monitor her vital signs, and multiple safety divers would shadow her progress through the course. Remember, this is not about proving anything to anyone, Morrison emphasized. If at any point you feel unsafe or uncertain, signal immediately, and we'll abort the attempt. No one will think less of you for making a smart decision about your own safety. Sarah appreciated Morrison's concern for her welfare, but she also understood that she had only one opportunity to attempt the course. The combination of preparation, conditions, and access would be difficult to replicate. She needed to give her absolute best effort while maintaining the judgment to recognize her limits. Chief Thompson approached her as the briefing concluded. "You've impressed everyone with your preparation and attitude," he said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've earned the respect of some very tough instructors." That night, Sarah reviewed every aspect of her preparation one final time. She practiced the breathing techniques Rodriguez had taught her, visualized herself moving through the course successfully, and mentally rehearsed the emergency signals she would use if needed. The combination of excitement and nervousness reminded her of the night before major swimming competitions in college. She also reflected on how much her understanding of SEAL training had evolved over the past week. What had begun as a straightforward journalism assignment had become a personal journey of discovery. She had learned about the intersection of mental and physical training, the importance of preparation and technique, and the value of pushing beyond perceived limitations. The morning of her attempt dawned clear and calm, with perfect visibility in the coastal waters. Sarah arrived at the base early, feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. The support team was already preparing equipment and reviewing safety procedures. The underwater course had been inspected and certified safe for the attempt. Rodriguez met her at the equipment staging area, carrying diving gear and safety equipment. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked, studying her expression for signs of anxiety or doubt. "Ready," Sarah replied simply. She had learned during her preparation that overthinking the challenge would only create additional mental pressure. Her focus needed to be on execution rather than outcome. The safety briefing covered every aspect of the attempt. Sarah would be accompanied by 3 safety divers, positioned at critical points along the course. Medical personnel would monitor her condition before and after the attempt. Emergency signals were reviewed, and abort procedures were confirmed with all team members. As the briefing concluded, Sarah began her preparation routine. She started with the breathing exercises Rodriguez had taught her. Feeling her heart rate decrease and her focus sharpen, the familiar routine helped calm her nerves and prepared her physiologically for the challenge ahead. Lieutenant Commander Morrison approached as she completed her breathing preparation. "Last chance to change your mind," he said with a slight smile. "No one expects you to do this." Sarah looked out at the underwater course markers bobbing in the gentle swells. The challenge that had seemed impossible a week ago now felt achievable, though still formidable. Her preparation had been thorough, her support team was exceptional, and her motivation was genuine. "I'm ready to give it a try, sir," she replied, pulling on her diving mask and checking her equipment one final time. The walking path to the water's edge felt longer than usual as Sarah approached the starting point of the underwater course. Members of the instruction team had gathered to observe her attempt, creating an atmosphere of anticipation mixed with professional concern. This was unprecedented territory for everyone involved. Rodriguez accompanied her to the water's edge, offering final words of encouragement and technical reminders. "Remember everything we practiced," he said quietly. "Trust your preparation. Listen to your body. And don't try to be a hero." Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom behind his words. The challenge ahead would test everything she had learned about breath-holding, underwater navigation, and mental toughness. But more than that, it would test her ability to make good decisions under pressure and recognize her own limitations. As she waded into the Pacific Ocean, Sarah felt the familiar embrace of cool water around her body. The underwater course stretched before her, its obstacles barely visible beneath the surface. In a few moments, she would begin an attempt that would either validate her week of intensive preparation or teach her a valuable lesson about the limits of civilian capabilities. The countdown to her attempt was about to begin, and Sarah Martinez was as ready as she would ever be to find out whether a journalist could challenge a 10-year-old record set by one of the Navy's most elite warriors. The water temperature registered 68 degrees Fahrenheit as Sarah Martinez positioned herself at the starting line of the underwater obstacle course. Chief Thompson held the official stopwatch, while Lieutenant Commander Morrison coordinated the safety team through radio communications. 3 safety divers had already taken their positions along the course, ready to assist if needed. Sarah floated motionless for 30 seconds, allowing her body to acclimate to the water temperature and her mind to achieve the focused state Rodriguez had taught her. The breathing preparation had worked perfectly. Her heart rate was slow and steady, and she felt an almost meditative calm despite the magnitude of the challenge ahead. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Martinez," Chief Thompson called from the observation platform. "Remember, we're timing from the moment you submerge until you surface at the finish point." Sarah took one final deep breath using the technique Rodriguez had drilled into her over the past 3 days. 4 counts in, 7 count hold, 8 counts out. She repeated the pattern twice more, feeling her blood oxygen levels reach their optimal state. Her body was as prepared as it could possibly be. At exactly 0947 hours, Sarah Martinez disappeared beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean. The first obstacle appeared immediately below her. A submerged tunnel that extended 30 meters through a series of concrete pipes. Sarah descended to the tunnel entrance, her movements deliberate and controlled. The key was maintaining perfect buoyancy while conserving energy for the challenges that lay ahead. Through her diving mask, Sarah could see the tunnel stretching into blue-green darkness. The concrete walls were covered with marine growth, that created a slightly disorienting visual environment. She reminded herself to focus on technique, rather than the claustrophobic sensation of swimming through an enclosed space. Sarah began moving through the tunnel, using the modified breaststroke Rodriguez had taught her. The technique minimized turbulence while providing steady forward progress. Her legs moved in slow, powerful kicks that propelled her efficiently through the water, without wasting precious oxygen. 20 meters into the tunnel, Sarah encountered the first major test of her mental preparation. Carbon dioxide was beginning to build up in her bloodstream, creating the initial urge to breathe. Rodriguez had warned her about this moment. The psychological pressure would only increase from here, and managing it successfully was crucial for completing the course. She forced herself to maintain steady progress through the tunnel, fighting the instinct to rush toward the exit. Panic or rapid movement would consume oxygen quickly and doom her attempt. Instead, Sarah focused on the visualization exercises she had practiced, seeing herself moving smoothly toward the tunnel's end. The tunnel exit appeared ahead of her, and Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction as she completed the first obstacle. But there was no time for celebration. She still had 7 more challenges ahead of her, and her body was already signaling increasing discomfort from oxygen deprivation. Safety diver number 1 gave her a thumbs up as she emerged from the tunnel, confirming that she was still moving well and showing no signs of distress. Sarah acknowledged the signal and immediately oriented herself toward the second obstacle, a series of underwater hoops positioned at different depths. The hoop section required precise 3-dimensional navigation while maintaining forward momentum. Sarah had practiced similar exercises during her preparation, but the real challenge was executing the movements while managing increasing physiological pressure. Her body wanted oxygen, and every second underwater intensified that demand. Sarah descended to the deepest hoop, positioned 12 feet below the surface. The increased pressure at this depth affected her buoyancy. Requiring subtle adjustments to maintain proper body position, she glided through the first hoop smoothly, then ascended to the second level where 3 more hoops awaited. The middle section of hoops tested her spatial awareness and fine motor control. Sarah had to navigate through openings barely wider than her body while avoiding contact with the rigid obstacles. Any collision would disrupt her smooth progress and waste valuable energy and oxygen. As she approached the final hoop in the sequence, Sarah felt the first serious wave of discomfort from carbon dioxide buildup. Her body was sending increasingly urgent signals to breathe, creating a psychological pressure that threatened to overwhelm her focus. This was the moment Rodriguez had prepared her for, the point where mental toughness mattered more than physical ability. Sarah used the breathing visualization technique, imagining herself taking deep, satisfying breaths, while actually continuing to hold her breath underwater. The mental exercise helped her push through the discomfort and maintain concentration on the task at hand. She completed the hoop sequence and immediately oriented toward the third obstacle. The third challenge was a weighted sled that had to be dragged 15 meters along the ocean floor. This obstacle tested both physical strength and the ability to perform work while oxygen deprived. Sarah had struggled with similar exercises during training, but she had learned techniques for maximizing efficiency. She grasped the sled's handle and began pulling it across the sandy bottom. The key was using her entire body for propulsion rather than just her arms. Sarah positioned herself horizontally and used powerful leg kicks to generate forward momentum while maintaining her grip on the sled. The weighted drag was exhausting, and Sarah felt her oxygen reserves depleting rapidly. Her muscles began producing lactic acid from the anaerobic work, adding to her physical discomfort, but she maintained steady progress, covering the required distance in what felt like an eternity, but was actually 47 seconds. Safety diver number 2 monitored her closely during the sled exercise, ready to intervene if she showed signs of serious distress. Sarah's technique remained sound, and her movements stayed controlled despite the obvious effort required. She released the sled handle and immediately began swimming toward the fourth obstacle. The halfway point of the course featured an underwater maze constructed from concrete blocks and metal pipes. Navigating the maze required problem-solving skills while managing severe oxygen debt. Sarah had memorized the correct route during her preparation, but executing it while experiencing the discomfort of extended breath-holding was an entirely different challenge. She entered the maze confidently, following the path she had visualized dozens of times. Left around the first corner, straight for 10 meters, right at the T-junction, then a final left turn toward the exit. The route was clear in her mind, but the physical discomfort was becoming overwhelming. Carbon dioxide levels in Sarah's bloodstream were now triggering intense urges to breathe. Her body was essentially screaming for oxygen, creating a psychological pressure that threatened to cloud her judgment. Rodriguez had warned her that this was where most people failed, not from physical incapacity, but from mental surrender to discomfort. Sarah forced herself to maintain the slow, deliberate pace that had carried her through the first half of the course. Rushing through the maze would lead to navigation errors and wasted energy. She turned the final corner and saw the maze exit ahead, feeling a surge of determination despite her body's protests. The fifth obstacle was a fine motor skills test that required Sarah to manipulate a series of underwater locks and latches. This challenge was designed to evaluate the ability to perform detailed work while oxygen deprived, a skill essential for SEAL operations involving underwater demolitions or equipment recovery. Sarah's hands were beginning to feel the effects of oxygen deprivation as she approached the manipulation station. Fine motor control deteriorated quickly during extended breath holding, making precision work increasingly difficult. She had practiced this exact sequence repeatedly, but the real test was executing it while her body demanded immediate return to the surface. The first lock opened easily under her practiced touch. The second required more concentration, as her fingers felt less responsive than usual. By the third lock, Sarah was working almost entirely from muscle memory. Her conscious mind focused on resisting the overwhelming urge to abort the attempt and surface immediately. She completed the manipulation sequence and immediately oriented toward the sixth obstacle. Time was becoming critical now. She had been underwater for over 6 minutes, and the most challenging portions of the course still lay ahead. Her preparation had been thorough, but she was now operating in uncharted territory for her personal capabilities. The sixth challenge was an underwater search and recovery task. Sarah had to locate 3 specific objects scattered across a sandy area and gather them in a collection basket. This obstacle tested visual acuity and systematic searching ability while managing extreme physiological stress. Sarah began her search pattern, sweeping back and forth across the designated area. Her vision was beginning to tunnel slightly from oxygen deprivation, making the search more difficult than it had been during practice sessions. She located the first object quickly, a weighted ring partially buried in the sand. The second object took longer to find. Sarah's search pattern was still systematic, but her movements were becoming less efficient as her body dealt with increasing oxygen debt. She found the second item, a metal cylinder, hidden among artificial reef structures, and placed it in the collection basket. The third object proved elusive. Sarah completed 2 full search patterns without locating it, feeling precious seconds slip away as her air hunger intensified. Finally, she spotted the target, a small weighted disc, camouflaged against the darker sand near the search area boundary. Her relief at finding it was mixed with the realization that she was now approaching 7 minutes underwater. Safety diver number 3 positioned himself near the 7th obstacle, watching Sarah's progress with growing concern. Her movements remained controlled, but he could see signs of increasing stress in her body language. She was still well within safe limits, but the final challenges would test her absolute limits. The 7th obstacle was perhaps the most demanding. A vertical ascent and descent through a series of pipes that tested both physical endurance and spatial orientation. Sarah had to swim up through one pipe, cross over at the surface, then descend through a second pipe while maintaining perfect buoyancy control. Sarah began the ascent, using powerful leg kicks to propel herself vertically through the narrow pipe. The ascent was exhausting after nearly 7 minutes of continuous underwater activity, but she maintained steady progress toward the surface crossing point. She emerged briefly at the top of the obstacle, took no breath as per the rules, and immediately began the descent portion. The descent through the second pipe was more challenging than the ascent. Sarah had to control her buoyancy carefully to avoid sinking too rapidly, while also fighting the psychological pressure of returning to depth when her body desperately wanted to remain at the surface. She completed the vertical challenge and oriented toward the final obstacle. The 8th and final challenge was a 20-meter sprint swim through open water to the finish line. After 7 previous obstacles and nearly 7.5 minutes underwater, This final sprint would test Sarah's ability to find a final reservoir of energy when her body was running on fumes. Sarah began the final sprint, using a modified freestyle stroke that Rodriguez had taught her for maximum speed underwater. Her muscles were operating anaerobically now, producing significant lactic acid that added to her overall discomfort. But the finish line was visible ahead, and she summoned every remaining ounce of determination. Her stroke rate increased as she approached the finish, driven by a combination of competitive instinct and desperate desire to breathe. The safety divers shadowed her progress closely, ready to assist if she showed any signs of losing consciousness. But Sarah's movements remained strong and controlled, despite the obvious effort required. Chief Thompson watched through binoculars as Sarah approached the finish line, his stopwatch showing an elapsed time that seemed impossible. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood beside him, equally focused on Sarah's progress and the safety protocols surrounding her attempt. Sarah touched the finish line marker and immediately began her ascent to the surface. The 20-foot ascent seemed to take forever, but she maintained her composure and ascended at a controlled rate to avoid any risk of decompression problems. When her head finally broke the surface, she gasped in the sweet Pacific air with a sound of pure relief. "Time!" Chief Thompson called out, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. 8 minutes and 53 seconds. The announcement sent a shock through the entire observation team. Sarah had not only completed the course successfully but had exceeded Rodriguez's 10-year-old record by 6 seconds. The impossible had happened. A civilian journalist had just set a new record on one of the Navy's most challenging underwater courses. Sarah treaded water near the finish platform, still catching her breath and processing what had just occurred. The safety divers surrounded her immediately, checking her condition and offering assistance. She felt exhausted but exhilarated, amazed by what her body and mind had been able to accomplish with proper preparation and determination. Rodriguez was the first to reach her as she climbed onto the finish platform. His expression showed a mixture of professional pride and personal amazement. "That was outstanding," he said simply. "You executed everything we practiced perfectly. That time is legitimately impressive for anyone, civilian or military." Lieutenant Commander Morrison approached with the official results. "Miss Martinez, I need to inform you that your time of 8 minutes and 53 seconds establishes a new record for this course. In 10 years, no SEAL candidate has exceeded that performance." The gravity of the achievement began to sink in as Sarah caught her breath and reviewed what had just happened. She had come to the naval base as a journalist seeking to understand SEAL training. She was leaving as the unlikely holder of a record that had stood for a decade. Chief Thompson shook her hand with obvious respect. "I've been training SEALs for 15 years, he said. "I've never seen a first-time attempt like that. Your preparation and execution were textbook perfect." As the medical team completed their post-attempt evaluation, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A week ago, the idea of attempting a SEAL training exercise would have seemed absurd, but through systematic preparation, expert instruction, and mental toughness she hadn't known she possessed, she had achieved something extraordinary. The debrief session later that morning was attended by the entire training staff. Rodriguez analyzed Sarah's technique in detail, identifying the factors that had contributed to her success. Her preparation had been thorough, her execution had been nearly flawless, and her mental approach had been exactly what was required for elite performance. The breathing preparation was perfect, Rodriguez noted during his analysis. She never showed signs of panic or rushed decision-making. Her movement efficiency was comparable to our best candidates, and her mental toughness under pressure was exceptional. Lieutenant Commander Morrison used Sarah's performance as a teaching moment for his staff. "This demonstrates that success in our training isn't just about military experience or physical conditioning. Mental preparation, technical knowledge, and the ability to perform under pressure are what separate exceptional performers from everyone else." As Sarah prepared to leave the naval base that afternoon, she carried with her not just a story for Defense Weekly, but a profound personal experience that had changed her understanding of human potential. She had learned that limitations are often mental constructs rather than physical realities, and that proper preparation can enable extraordinary achievements. The news of her record spread quickly through the SEAL community, generating interest from training commands across the Navy. Sarah found herself fielding requests for interviews from military publications and training organizations interested in her preparation methods and mental techniques. But more than the recognition or media attention, Sarah valued the personal transformation she had experienced during her week at Coronado. She had discovered reserves of mental toughness and physical capability that she hadn't known existed. The underwater course had tested more than her ability to hold her breath. It had challenged her understanding of what was possible when preparation met opportunity. 6 months later, Sarah's record still stood. Several SEAL candidates had come close, and one had matched her time exactly. But none had exceeded 8 minutes and 53 seconds. The civilian journalist who had come to observe had inadvertently become part of the legacy she had originally planned simply to document. Rodriguez often told new candidates about Sarah's achievement during mental preparation sessions. "She proved that the most important muscle for SEAL training isn't in your arms or legs," he would say. "It's the 6 inches between your ears." Mental toughness and proper preparation can overcome almost any obstacle. Sarah returned to her journalism career with enhanced credibility and a unique perspective on military training. Her article for Defense Weekly became one of the most read pieces in the publication's history. But she knew that the real story wasn't what she had written, it was what she had lived. The experience had taught her that extraordinary achievements often begin with simple questions. In her case, it had started with wondering if she could give it a go at something that seemed impossible. The answer, as it turned out, was a resounding yes. With the right preparation, guidance, and mental approach, even the most challenging goals could become achievable realities. Years later, when asked about her record-setting performance, Sarah would always credit the exceptional instruction she received and the systematic preparation that made success possible. But those who had observed her achievement knew that something special had happened that day. A civilian had demonstrated that the warrior mindset wasn't exclusive to those wearing military uniforms. The underwater course continued to challenge SEAL candidates, and Rodriguez continued to hold it as the gold standard for mental toughness under pressure. But now there was an asterisk in the record books, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected people can achieve the most extraordinary things when they dare to answer the question, "Can I give it a go?"